Hello. Onions.
Ellen, you
Hi.
there?
I just told Pat, stop talking. You could be heard. So I'm gonna mute myself because I haven't eaten dinner and I don't want to be heard chewing and what have you. But you think you're good?
I think so. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hi, Bill. Bye, Bill.
Hello. Doing well. How are you?
Doing all right. Do you want to just try making sure you can share your screen?
I cannot.
Okay. Hmm. Mute. I can make you host, which should allow you to do that. All right. Well, I was just going to put up just a placeholder screen on mine.
I can do that too. I just have a nice nice title slide here.
Okay.
There you go.
I just like having my email up so people can get it.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah, if you just want to, do the host switch after you're done with the introduction, that's great too.
yeah, I think we'll try that. I thought I was trying to figure out how to make a panelist able to share screens, but I couldn't get that. But there should be an option to make you a co-host too, but I don't see that right now.
Yeah, Zoom is definitely not my strong suit. I'm much more used to WebEx and Teams.
No. Teams I've used, that wouldn't work for this scenario.
No, it wouldn't.
So, well, I just recently convinced the Federation board to spring for a software package, which is why we're able to do this. And I was going back and forth between this and WebEx. So don't tell them that WebEx is better because it looks like we made the wrong decision.
I would never say WebEx is better than something else.
All right.
Don't need to worry about that. It says that if you hover over me and click the ellipsis, there might be an option to make me a co-host that way.
That's how I can make you host. Yes, I can see
Okay.
that. But that's all. That's the only option I'm getting.
Yeah, so then what you would have to do is go do it in your account settings, which looks less simple.
Yeah. So we have 9 participants so far. How do you want to handle questions? Do you want to save them all for the end or maybe take a break at a midpoint?
There's kind of a natural break in this, but where that natural break lands is before the content that I think there would be a lot of questions about.
Okay.
And this one's only 40 slides. So it can be quick. So the way I typically or prefer to handle it is if there are questions that pertain to the slide that are for clarification or questions like that, then it makes sense, I think, to handle them on the spot. But I think the more in-depth ones are typically better suited for the end, just because from my experience, they can they can get us off track.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I'll monitor the Q and A, and if there's something that maybe I think is just a clarification type question, I'll jump in, but otherwise we'll hold off till the end.
I think that makes sense.
All right, I'm gonna go back to putting up my little placeholder slide. All right, Bill, I have 7 o'clock, but maybe just wait another couple minutes, get any last minute stragglers. Good, thanks. All right. Bill, I've got 7:02. I think maybe I'll get started now. All right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Adam Carson. I'm an associate planner with the Rockland County Department of Planning. Thank you. I'm also the executive director of the Rockland Municipal Planning Federation. The Federation is a nonprofit organization that, as one of its primary missions, provides up-to-date educational sessions on relevant topics for Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals members so that they can make more informed decisions regarding the development applications that come before them. Our featured speaker tonight is Bill Oberkar from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, who is here to talk about clean energy and your comprehensive plan. But before I begin, I'd like to bring up some housekeeping items. My email address is on the screen now. If you are on a board outside of Rockland County and need a certificate of attendance, please email or request to me. That includes your name, municipality, and board. The Federation maintains attendance records that we share with the towns and villages within Rockland County, so local board members do not need a certificate. Next, everyone is muted and will remain so. If you have a question, please use the question function, which you can find at either the top or bottom of your screen. I'll monitor the Q&A, and we will probably deal with most questions at the end. But if there is something that is immediately relevant to what Bill is discussing, I might jump in and ask for clarification. All right. The urgent need to address greenhouse gas emissions has been well established in the scientific community for some time. However, recent years have seen unmistakable signs of the impact of climate change to even the casual observer. The frequency and strength of extreme weather events have been increasing across the globe. Sea level rise has begun to threaten coastal communities, and we have witnessed a multitude of changes to the natural world as rising temperatures alter ecosystems. Some of the policy efforts to address climate change, such as minimum mileage standards for vehicles, are happening at the national or state level. Some of you may be familiar with the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was signed into law in 2019, with the goal of achieving 100% zero emission electricity by 2040 and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 85% from 1990 levels by 2050. It is one of the most ambitious and aggressive climate and clean energy initiatives in the country. However, efforts to combat climate change must also be made at the local level. Policies that influence where and how we live, work, and get around are made in our cities, towns, and villages, and will also play a role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So a good place to start is your community's comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plans articulate visions and goals for a community and outline objectives and strategies for achieving them. They serve as a guide and a framework for policymakers as they hopefully bring us into a greener future. Helping us with that tonight is Bill Oberkar. Bill is a project manager on the clean energy siting team at NYSERDA. He currently focuses on battery energy storage, reviewing codes and standards related to energy storage technologies, ensuring alignment with the New York State Uniform Code, and guiding local government officials through the new requirements and best practices and into implementation of appropriate local laws and sound decision-making. Bill previously worked on NYSERDA's PV Trainers Network program, providing technical assistance, developing resources, and training local officials about solar energy throughout New York State. In addition to his statewide work, he spent several years administering New York City's municipal solar programs. Bill received his BA in philosophy and religion from the State University of New York College at Old Westbury. He also has a master's degree in public policy with a concentration in urban and regional planning from Stony Brook University. Please join me in welcoming Bill Oberkar. Thank you, Bill. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I will make you host so you can begin your screen sharing.
All right, thank you, Adam. Thanks for the great introduction, and thanks for hosting this webinar tonight, and the others in the series for the Clean Energy Communities High Impact Action. So as Adam said, my name is Bill Oberkar. I'm a project manager on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team, and tonight we're here to go through clean energy and your comprehensive plan. What that is going to look like is first we're going to have an introduction to who I am, what my team does, and some of the resources that we've created, and then we're going to have broad overviews of clean energy and comprehensive planning as a discipline. And then finally, the main part of the presentation is going to be combining the two for clean energy and your comprehensive plan. And then I'll just show you some resources that are available in addition to the ones that we talk about now. So we've got over here on the right-hand side, got a few guidebooks that the Clean Energy Siting team at NYSERDA has produced. The target audience for these is local governments. So first, we've got the New York Solar Guidebook for local governments. That is the oldest of these. And then we've got the Wind Energy Guidebook, the Energy Storage Guidebook, which is relatively new, and the brand new younger brother here is Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plans for Local Government. It's a new guidebook, just released December of 2021. Everything that I'm going to cover tonight is more or less in that guidebook. Some of the clean energy overview material is not going to be in the comprehensive plan guidebook, but pretty much everything else will. If folks are revisiting their plans, creating a plan from scratch, if you're at any stage in that development, I would really urge you to take a look at the Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plan for Local Governments resource. It was developed in partnership with Jessica Bosher from Pace University, Land Use Law Center. Folks may know her, especially if you're familiar with the PV Trainers Network. She and I actually traveled the state together for a number of years, training folks when community solar was new. You can find all of these resources at nyserda.ny.gov/siting. All of these resources have kind of accordion menus within them. So they contain multiple resources within each chapter in some cases as well. So you can really spend a lot of time if you want to looking through these materials. And finally, my team also offers technical assistance to a variety of stakeholders, but we do try to focus on technical assistance of local governments. So if you email solarhelp@nycerta.ny.gov, that email will go to the entire clean energy siting team at once. It's not just a random email box that no one really checks. There are 5 of us who look at it in real time. Although we do like to prioritize technical assistance requests from local government. So if you are contacting us from a local government or on behalf of a local government, we do ask that you kind of identify that within the email so that we know to prioritize it and bump it to the top of our list. So that was the commercial for the clean energy siting team. Now we're going to go into some clean energy policy and just broader overview. As Adam mentioned at the top, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA, or the Climate Act. That's really why we're here. That's nice. That's New York State's current legislation for mandated renewable energy targets, greenhouse gas emission targets, and technology-specific targets. So we've got electricity sector goals of 70% renewable electricity by 2030. That's an interim goal toward 100% emissions-free grid by 2040, 10 years later. And then the way, or part of the way that we're going to do that is 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar. So distributed versus utility scale. Distributed means community solar or below, not the big 20 megawatt, 100 megawatt, 250 megawatts. So when you see distributed, that's what that means. We're talking about typically 5 megawatts or below. So 10,000 megawatts there. The old goal was 6,000 megawatts by 2025, but we met that, or we're on pace to meet that a few years early, actually. So actually just last year, there was a proceeding and there's currently a roadmap out that maps the path to 10 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025. In addition to that, we've got 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And then we've got a 3 gigawatt energy storage goal by 2030 with an interim goal of 1.5 gigawatts of energy storage. And one thing that I think is important to understand, and from my experience in doing this, I find that not enough folks really do understand this. What we have in that chart or graph at the bottom is known as the energy mix. So you can see that this is going to total 100% of our electricity. The different colors represent share of the total energy generation. So as you can see in the late 90s and early aughts, coal has a decreasing share and natural gas has an increasing share in our energy mix. Renewables climbing. And one thing I do want to notice, or I want everyone to notice, is this only goes up to 2017. NYSERDA's first large-scale renewable solicitation was in 2017, and community solar was opened up to all customers in 2016. So there really wasn't a ton of megawatt scale solar development in New York prior to that. And then the other thing I want to call attention to is the nuclear. That, if you'll notice again, only goes up to 2017. Indian Point has been in the process of decommissioning. So the nuclear is going to play a decreasing share in our energy mix as that plant continues to be decommissioned. So that's our policy framework. That's really why we're here. That is a legislated goal, legislative mandate. What we have coming up in the next few slides is just a little bit of terminology and some really basic information about mostly solar and renewables a bit more broadly. Solar photovoltaics, those are solar panels. Those are the ones that you see most often. That's what we most commonly associate with solar energy. There's also concentrated solar power. So that's when you see a bunch of mirrors out in the desert pointed at a giant ball. There's water in that ball. The heat from the mirrors turns that water to steam and spins a turbine to generate electricity. And then solar thermal is also using the sun's heat typically to generate hot water. So we're really focused on solar PV, as there's not a lot of desert space in New York State. And within solar PV, we've got different types of installations. I actually thought I had fixed this slide. I did not. So behind the meter, what that means, and community solar is not behind the meter for the most part. And that's what I neglected to fix in this iteration. I apologize for that. Community solar and utility scale are front of the meter, residential, commercial behind the meter. What behind the meter means is that the solar is connected to load. So it's sitting in between your load and your utility meter. Front of the meter is when the solar is plugged directly into the grid. So those are your community solar installations where you're connecting the solar into the grid, and then you're going out into the utility territory and getting subscribers to pay for the credits that power generates. Utility scale, for our purposes in New York, we want to think of that as 20 megawatts, 25 megawatts. Technically, it's anything over 7.5 megawatts DC. But just because of the way the economics shake out, we don't see too many projects between that 7.5 and that 20 megawatt range. So we want to think of the utility scale solar as the large scale renewable program at NYSERDA, and the ones that the Office of Renewable Energy Siting is going to be permitting going forward as of 2020. So for community solar and utility scale, they're almost always going to be ground mounted. Residential is typically going to be rooftop. You do get some ground mount residential. Commercial could really be either or. Ground mounted solar, we want to plan for 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. And a megawatt is going to power between 100 and 200 homes. I understand that range is large. It depends on how many people live in the home, how big is the home, is your heat electric, is your air central, do you have window units? All of those things will affect how much it takes to power your home, obviously. And most community solar, for reference, are somewhere between 2 and 5 megawatts at 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. So that's a lot of what we're dealing with. Wind is a bit different. We've got the rotor, the nacelle, and the tower. They're numbered there in the image. The numbers correspond. That's what those pieces of the wind turbine are called. Increasing turbine capacities and sizes. So we typically are seeing 2 to 3 megawatts per turbine. You can increase that by increasing rotor diameters and tower or hub heights. Onshore wind turbines are typically smaller than offshore. I would say onshore wind turbines are almost always smaller than offshore. Offshore wind turbines are typically massive. And we've got just an image of what wind turbines onshore are going to look like in the landscape over there. Finally, we've got energy storage. Energy storage systems are composed of cells, modules, and racks. Those are the building blocks, cells being the smallest. You see the cylindrical cells over there to the right. Cells wired together go into a module. That's the Panasonic piece of equipment next to the cells. And then modules wired together as a rack. Looks like a little, college refrigerator, mini refrigerator. That's a rack. And then we've got the battery management system, which is the eyes and ears and the brain of that. It's going to be able to be aware of what's happening within the system, detect any malfunctions, and even send out signals as needed to manufacturers, first responders, and anyone who's really wired to receive those signals. We've got different types of installation for energy storage as well that are going to more or less mirror solar. Except with this one, we're typically going to see residential and commercial actually be behind the meter. And those utility scale solar projects, or storage projects rather, are going to be front of the meter. There is a market for community solar plus storage. That would also technically be front of the meter, but it's certainly less common than community solar without storage. So why energy storage? So they're often paired with intermittent renewables. So the solar only generates electricity when the sun is shining, wind when the wind is blowing. If we can store that energy in a battery and use it when the sun's not shining, that solves or that has the potential to solve a major problem with renewables. Also backup power. When the grid goes down, if you just have solar that's connected to the grid, your solar will not work anymore. You can, however, add a battery backup and get some power for critical loads when the power goes down safely. Energy arbitrage is basically charging a battery when power is cheap and releasing it when power is expensive during the grid peak. Grid upgrade deferrals. So utilities tend to rate base upgrades to the grids. What rate basing means is they spread the cost out over everyone's utility bill. Grid upgrades tend to be expensive. If we can add storage to the grid, we can delay or defer those upgrades. And then finally, there are a number of grid services that energy storage offers. I believe the number is something like 10 or so different ones that we are not going to get into here. So let's talk about what we are here to talk about. Land use and local considerations for these technologies. For all technologies, we want to think about what is the appropriate location, what zones do we want them in. We want to leverage our zoning and for all of those technologies. We want to think about what are their environmental impacts, and not just stormwater runoff, but environmental impacts in the human environment as well. Things like noise for wind turbine, aesthetic impacts as well. Bulk and area standards are going to be a consideration for all of these. Decommissioning is certainly something that comes up for all of these technologies. And then taxation, particularly with regard to real property tax law section 487, which is the exemption for certain types of energy generating equipment. All of these types of equipment fall under that exemption. So that's where we start talking about payments in lieu of taxes and opt-outs and all of those great things. So all these technologies have that in common. So now we've got the hot button issues for each technology. For solar, it's mostly visual and aesthetic impacts. I'm sure folks in Rockland are aware of that by now. Not everyone loves the way solar looks. Even the biggest solar fans don't necessarily love the way it looks. So it's something that we have to think about and plan for from a land use perspective. And agricultural land impacts also in New York State is a big one, balancing solar development with agricultural uses. For wind, we've also got the visual impacts, but we've got noise because wind has moving parts. So there's kind of a whooshing noise that's associated with them. Shadow flicker is something that is typically considered when you're dealing with wind. However, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab just released a social science survey a couple months ago saying that most people don't really even notice shadow flicker or are otherwise not bothered by it. So that one's more or less up for debate. The main one for energy storage, folks probably are aware of this by now, is fire safety. So there is some level of fire hazard associated with energy storage equipment, and we need our first responders to know how to handle that should that situation arise. Here we have another snapshot of our energy mix. This is current or more current than 2017. So you can see statewide we're at 55% zero emissions and 43% fossil fuels. So doing increasingly better year over year, which is what we want to see. We've got a little map over there on the left to give you an idea of where these different technologies are cited. If you go to NYSERDA's website, you can actually filter by technology if you're particularly interested in say energy storage or fuel cells. You can look at that map on NYSERDA's website. All right, we've got different processes for permitting clean energy development based on the size and type of the installation. So for solar and wind projects of less than 25 megawatts, those are going to be permitted at the local level through seeker, state environmental quality review, and municipal requirements like your local zoning law, your comprehensive plan to the extent that that governs solar development. For projects greater than 25 megawatts, they're going to be permitted at the state level, either through Article 10, if the technology is not renewable. If the technology is renewable, it will go through the Office of Renewable Energy Siting that was created in 2020, April of 2020. Projects that are 20 megawatts or above, so between 20 and 25, have the option to opt into that state level ORES process. It's also 94C. I may use those terms interchangeably. ORES, Office of Renewable Energy Siting, 94C is that state level process for permitting projects that are 20 to 25 megawatts and up. So for energy storage, projects that are paired or co-located with large-scale renewable generators are permitted at the state level. And projects that are not paired with large-scale generators are permitted at the local level. So the ORES isn't going to handle energy storage because storage is not necessarily generation. It is, in fact, not generation. So it's treated a bit differently in regulations. So now we're going to get a little bit into comprehensive planning before we kind of combine the two. And, you know, I just want to caveat this with, this is going to be a very high level overview of what comprehensive planning is. This is really geared toward folks who have, you know, zero frame of reference. The authority in New York State on comprehensive planning is the Department of State. It is not NYSERDA. So NYSERDA is here and very happy to help with clean energy issues as they relate to your comprehensive plan. But if you have broader comprehensive planning issues that don't relate to clean energy, Department of State is going to be the place to go for that. So when defining comprehensive plan, we're going to define that as materials written and or graphic, including but not limited to maps, charts, studies, resolutions, reports, and other descriptive material that identify the goals, objective principles, guidelines, policies, standards, and devices and instruments for immediate and long-range protection, enhancement, growth, and development of the municipality. It's a mouthful. But really, you know, what we're looking at is these are the substantive parts. So we've got descriptive material is kind of backward to present looking. We want to know where we are right now when we start the comprehensive plan and how we got to the point where we are right now. And then goals, objective, principles, guidelines, policies, standards, devices, and instruments. Those are all kind of clustered into where do we want to, what would we like to happen, and how are we going to get there? And then immediate and long range, you know, we don't want to just have a plan for 20 years down the road. We need to be thinking about how we're getting there. So immediate, long range, and everything in between. And finally, for the protection, enhancement, growth, and development. And I like this piece of it because it really synthesizes the whole thing. You know, protection, we're looking at the past again and the present. We want to protect what's here that we like, and that's especially that which has been here and is integral to the character of the community. But we also want to decide where we want to enhance what's already there and then further grow and develop it. So those are really what we're looking at. That's the crux of comprehensive planning. So we've got the what is what the community looks like now and what is envisioned to look like in the future. So these are the components of a comprehensive plan. I probably should have let folks know that, and we'll get into how energy fits into this framework in the next part of the presentation. But we're looking at what the community looks like now, what we envision it to look like in the future. We also want to consider how we plan to get there. We don't just want to throw out goals and not have any plan to achieve them. And then We also want to justify what we're doing. So why is that present or that future envision worth pursuing? Why is the present worth protecting? The point of the comprehensive plan is to really to codify these things and make them official, because land use regulations in New York State must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So if you want to have zoning, you need to have a comprehensive plan. If you don't, your zoning regulations are going to be vulnerable to challenges. So the relationship with zoning and code is here for reference, depending on whether you're a village, town, city, or county. So why is this important? Zoning and land use regulations, as I just mentioned, if those aren't grounded in a comprehensive plan, and a developer comes in and sees a solar law that's too restrictive, could theoretically challenge that law in court. And if the land use regulations are not based on a comprehensive plan, it's a vulnerability for you as the municipality. Consideration by other agencies. Even though New York is a home rule state, there are certain ways that doesn't apply. Certain county, state, and federal permitting processes are going to have the ability to override local laws in certain instances. But they will look at your comprehensive plan and your local zoning. I like to use ORES as the example for this. Their baseline is to abide your comprehensive plan and your local zoning. In order for ORES to kind of deem a piece of your zoning unreasonably burdensome, it has to be formally challenged by a developer. And that won't then, if an adjudicatory law judge finds that piece of the law is indeed overly burdensome, ORES isn't going to toss out the whole law. It's just going to be able to override that one piece that was deemed overly burdensome. So comprehensive planning and zoning is a really important way to give yourself a seat at the table and decision-making within your community when that decision is happening ultimately at different levels of government. It's also going to help us ensure that planning is not responsive to development, because if we plan around development that's already here, in some cases that's too late. So better to have a vision for what we would like to see in our community and do everything in our power to implement that vision. It also encourages communication and transparency between elected officials, decision makers, and the community. It gives community members an opportunity to buy in and be heard about their desires for the community, which is, as many of you likely know, very important. Finally, it's a documentation of the community's past, present, and future. It's just a very important testament to what makes this community, and a living testament to what makes this community, as we'll see, comprehensive plans ought to be revisited at regular intervals and updated. Key considerations on plannings broadly. We want to document, study, and understand existing conditions. I feel like I've gone over that, but you need to know what's here, what we've got, what we're looking at right now before we start figuring out what we want to preserve and what we want to change. We want to solicit and obtain community input. Much easier, better, less stressful to obtain the community input upfront than wait until there's a problem and get the community input that way. I'm sure folks are probably aware of that. This is, seeking that input actively in the comprehensive planning process is really a great way to make sure that members of the community are involved in the planning process. Adherence to a consistent process and structure. We're going to identify clear goals, select and define objectives and strategies, and then develop implementation plans to achieve those objectives and strategies. I'm not going to go into that now because that's most of the next part of this presentation. And then finally, funding. So when we set out initially to make the comprehensive planning guidebook in, I guess it was late spring 2020, we got a range of how much does it cost to create or amend a community, or how much does it cost to deal with a comprehensive plan. We got a range of, I think it was something between anywhere in $5 and like $200,000 or something, some massive range like that. So it just depends on the complexity of the community, whether you're starting from scratch, whether you're going to bring on consultants, what work is already done, what work needs to be done. So it will always cost some money. It can be quite costly. There are plenty of funding opportunities for municipalities who are pursuing comprehensive plan available at the state level. I believe there's some federal. I don't have them memorized because they are all listed with links in our comprehensive planning guidebook that we released at the end of last year. So if folks are interested in pursuing funding for a comprehensive plan, I would really urge you to check that out. It's in the resources section of the comprehensive planning guidebook. It's just links to funding. So comprehensive planning is a proactive versus a reactive exercise. Again, this is just touching on, better to have consulted before than have to deal with a problem after. That's really the crux of this. You want to be as proactive as possible. Do your community engagement. Do it in a serious way, an intellectually honest way. Make the effort. It can really, really be so beneficial to saving you headaches and stress down the line. And as I said, the Department of State is going to be the ultimate comprehensive planning authority here. So if you have questions about how energy relates to your comprehensive plan, we at NYSERDA are happy to help. Again, if you have questions about comprehensive planning in general, that's going to be Department of State's purview. They have resources as well as we do. These are linked in our guidebook as well. I believe they're also linked at the end of this presentation. They also have trainings. They have recorded trainings. So for folks interested or about to undergo a development of a comprehensive plan or a revision, I would really urge you to take a look at Department of State's resources in addition to NYSERDA's. This is the main part. Do we have any questions so far? I didn't really anticipate that we would.
No questions yet.
Okay. So we're going to get into how does clean energy fit into your comprehensive plan. So why do we want to plan for clean energy? Because we want the plan to be comprehensive, and clean energy development is going to be part of our community, therefore fulfilling the definition of comprehensive. We want, sorry, I gotta move my windows here. It's also, we need to plan for clean energy in order to strengthen our zoning and land use regulations that we want to come up with, because again, zoning and land use regulations need to be rooted in a comprehensive plan in New York State. So why plan for clean energy? So that you can regulate it with zoning down the road. What are the benefits here? Tangible representation of jurisdictions, priorities, and policies, even at state level and federal level permitting processes, as I said before. Provides clarity for municipal boards, decision makers, project developers, pretty much any stakeholder who is or may be involved in clean energy development is going to benefit from a clear, comprehensive plan, because you're going to communicate to industry and to everyone, what are the objectives for this community? What are we looking for? What do we want to see? If you communicate that, particularly to project developers, that they can do that, they can try to fulfill those goals. A lot of developers out there, especially the good ones, really do want to do that in earnest. May strengthen a jurisdiction's position in the event of a legal dispute or challenge. Covered that enough. Zoning needs to be grounded in a comprehensive plan. And finally, it can give you access to grants and incentives, in addition to the incentives for coming up with the comprehensive plan. So when we're defining and understanding clean energy, it's important to ensure that the scope of the community's understanding of plans for clean energy aligns with technologies and programs supporting New York State programs and goals. As such, clean energy should consider renewable energy technologies, technologies, strategies, and concepts which support implementation of renewables. So it's really a holistic approach there. We're not just looking at the technologies themselves. We're looking at the way those technologies come into our communities. Permitting for large-scale generators. So Article 10 in Exhibit 4, we have land use. Exhibit 3 in ORES, locations of facilities and surrounding land use. So this is just what's in the regs. A statement as to whether any applicable local jurisdiction has an adopted comprehensive plan applicable to lands on which facility components or ancillary facilities are located, and whether the proposed facility is consistent with such comprehensive plan. A copy of the plan shall be provided in the application with an indication of plan sections applicable to proposed uses. So what that's saying is when ORES is considering an application for a 25 megawatt system in your jurisdiction, part of that application is that they need to see the comprehensive plan. And that's one of the things that they're taking into consideration, is whether or not the proposed facility is consistent with the goals laid out in that comprehensive plan. So selecting a plan format and process. I'm not gonna belabor kind of the image here. All of the roads lead to, you probably need to either revisit or build a comprehensive plan from scratch, and you should probably include clean energy in it. It is a fun decision tree. I just find it hard to describe out loud. I've tried a few times, but pretty clear there. Land use moratoria. This has been a big one since 2016. We've seen them throughout the state pretty consistently. So what is it? It's a local law or ordinance suspending for a reasonable time property owners' rights to obtain development approvals. Why are we doing that? Its purpose is to grant time to consider, draft, and adopt local land use plans to respond to circumstances not adequately dealt with under current laws. How are we going to do that? We're going to formally adopt a moratorium and file it with the Department of State. What do we want to consider here? Reasonableness. The word reasonable appears under the what, so what that is saying is that moratoria typically cannot be indefinite. You need to have some sort of a time frame by which you are going to figure out how to recognize or how to regulate this type of development in your community. This is another one where if your moratorium says, no solar in our jurisdiction in perpetuity throughout the universe, if a developer were to challenge that, you would be vulnerable because you did not make that moratorium correspond to a reasonable time frame to come up with regulations for that type of development. So it's just important to really consider seriously, how long is it going to take us to build satisfactory or to draft and pass satisfactory regulations for this technology, for development of this technology in our community. You can typically extend a moratorium. Usually for solar, we've seen them around 6 months. At times they get extended another 6 months. I think rarely they go up to 18 months, but certainly have seen plenty for 6 months to a year. Another important thing to consider is the impacts on landowners and the community. So what a moratorium is it's a suspension of property rights, basically. And that can certainly, depending on the community, have some pretty profound impacts on members of that community for all sorts of reasons. But important to consider that is in effect what you're doing, is you're suspending property rights. Specificity of the timeline and scope. Timeline, I feel like it covered, but the scope, for renewables, you want to be specific about the technology that you're covering. That's really what your main consideration is for scope. Just certain types of development of a certain technology also. So we don't want to just say moratorium on all solar, because it's fine if people put solar on the roofs for the most part. So, limit your scope to what you're actually dealing with. So we're going to say solar farms over 2 megawatts for 6 months with an option to extend 6 months if necessary is an example of what's probably a reasonable timeline and scope for a moratorium. And as I said before, this all goes to legal standing. If the moratorium is not reasonable, or the less reasonable the moratorium is, the more vulnerable it is to challenge should that come up. All right, now we're going to go through this step by step. Step one is we're going to adopt a policy resolution or statement, which is going to assert our overall goals of comprehensive planning of the process, regarding clean energy specifically. We're going to state our intention to consider clean energy development and municipal plans and regulations. Finally, we're going to outline previously identified planning format and processes. So is this a new plan from its entirety? Is this a new component to a plan? Is this a regularly scheduled update to our comprehensive plan? So that's what that is. That's the type of material you want to include in your policy resolution or statement when you're looking to begin revising or creating your comprehensive plan. Second, you want to identify funding and resources required. This can be incorporated into step one. You can enumerate those funding sources or your plan to fund this, or your expected costs in your policy resolution or statement. In fact, it may be a good idea to do that. We also want to consider the use of in-house municipal staff, county regional planning staff, volunteers, hired consultants. So who's going to do this, and what is it going to cost, both in terms of hours, in terms of money, time for procurements, if that's going to be part of this. We're going to identify that in the funding phase here in step two. And finally, we're going to identify and apply for grant funding as available. As I said, there's a pretty good list of that available funding in our comprehensive planning guide that was released in December of last year. I would urge folks to take a look. Step three, we want to identify the body or individuals charged with developing the plan. So who's going to do this? That can also be incorporated into the resolution statement if you've kind of thought that far, or if there's a natural fit for who the people are. But this could be the local legislature, the planning board, a special board, a committee, like a task force or some, clean energy plan task force. But really the important thing is you want to ensure that those individuals are educated enough to speed on clean energy programs, goals, and technologies. Not necessarily as up to speed as somebody who does it as a full-time job, but just relative to members of the community. You want to make sure that those folks are relatively savvy with clean energy technologies and programs, because that will help. And once we know who's going to be drafting our clean energy component, we want to determine our existing conditions. So this is where we start to survey. We've got some examples of clean energy existing conditions over here on the side. Maybe the most important one from a development perspective is energy and grid considerations. I'm going to go through hosting capacity maps with you in a moment, so we'll leave that one aside for now. Proximity to grid infrastructure. I'll also be able to explain that better when I have the hosting capacity maps, but just know that it does matter. There's certain grid infrastructure that's advantageous for renewable energy projects to be sited near. And then finally, the municipal energy profile. Ag considerations, especially if you're in a community with a lot of ag land. So lands in certified ag districts are under ag assessments because renewable development can have some tax implications for ag assessments. So it's important to know where that is. And then soil types and qualities, how do we want to regulate, or what soil are we interested in protecting? Are we going with mineral soil groups 1 through 4? Are we going with prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance? We want to inventory what's in our community and start to think about, where our priorities are. Environmental considerations, environmental resources assessment. So what endangered or sensitive species do we have? Wetlands, things of that nature. Basically, that would come out in the state environmental quality review on the project development side also. But we want to know where those things are and identify them in our plan. And then finally, socioeconomic considerations. Do we want clean energy development to benefit what's called in the CLCPA disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities? It's state law in the Climate Act that at least 35% of benefits from clean energy should flow to disadvantaged communities with a goal of 40%. So that's one thing, if you want to harmonize your comprehensive plan with the Climate Act in the state, that would be an important consideration to include in your planning process. So this is our hosting capacity map. We'll do a little exercise here. I might go through it a bit quickly because it's a bit in the weeds. So basically this is an exercise to visualize our local energy distribution infrastructure. And that's going to help us identify potential locations for solar development based on certain criteria. Those criteria are going to be grid proximity, grid hosting capacity, existing zoning, and proximal land use. So for folks who don't know, your interconnection renewable energy projects in New York State, and the grid cannot handle the extra generation at that point of interconnection. What happens is the project developer has to bear the cost of the grid upgrades in order to interconnect that project. That can be $50,000, that can be, in the millions of dollars. So that can kill a project. So that's why we're going to look at these hosting capacity maps to kind of figure out where development is likely. So over here on the left, and I said this is a bit in the weeds, over here on the left, we've got just the hosting capacity map. So red circuits are likely to need costly upgrades. Green circuits are less likely. Blue circuits are not that likely to need costly upgrades. So in this community, we've got some blue circuits here, some green circuits here. So in this area with all the blue and this area with green, that's where developers are most likely to want to site projects in this community because that's where they're least likely to encounter expensive grid upgrades. So developers have access to these hosting capacity maps. They are public. So they're going to be able to see this. So if you look at it during your comprehensive planning process, you can get this idea of, oh, this is where we're primed for development. And then we're going to overlay that with, forget what this one is. We're going to overlay that with our existing zoning. So this is our, this is a zoning map on top of the hosting capacity map. So we can see which zones are near which circuits. So we can start to get an idea of which zones we want to allow development in. And then here, if our zoning isn't great for solar in a particular area, we can start to do things like floating overlay zones to be able to encourage development within a zone where there is a good site for renewable generation. So I said that was going to be a bit in the weeds. I hope I didn't lose anyone there. I tried to keep that pretty high level. But back to our steps for the comprehensive planning process for clean energy. We're at 5, which is the one after. If folks don't recall, that was the survey of existing conditions was number 4. So for 5, we want to design effective public outreach and education. Again, we want input from a wide range of diverse stakeholders. For clean energy, that's going to include utility representatives, local or regional environmental groups, nonprofits. This is going to give you an opportunity to formulate community concerns, issues, problems, and priorities. And it should include, questions and opportunities focused on feedback regarding sustainability and clean energy. We've got the little example notice for the meeting over there on the side. And one thing that I do like to hit, which it seems like Rockland County Planning Federation is doing, is to the extent possible, try to use the fact that we ended up kind of in this digital world to your advantage. It may be a lot easier to do this public outreach and engagement if people can kind of hook up the computer to the TV at home while they're eating dinner and just be on a webinar. I know that for my partner and I, who also works in clean energy, we've been able to attend so many more events and have learned so much just because everything is in a virtual format. So I'd really urge folks to try to take advantage of that. While in-person is important too, when it's safe to do that again, I feel like having virtual meetings can really be great to open up, who participates, whose voice are you hearing, and how are you hearing it. Finally, step 6 is we want to begin creating clean energy content for the comprehensive plan. So we're going to really look at everything we've learned, consider our goals, look at where we want to go, and we're going to put the substance of our plan together, look at what we learned from public outreach, and really create the meat of it. And then once we have our clean energy component, we're going to complete the legally required process to get it into action, which is referral of the approved plan by a planning special board to the local legislature, the planning board, county regional planning authority, etc. Basically what this is saying is that any and all of these bodies may be legally required to look at this, certainly county, and then others, I think, bearing more on the local level. Public hearings, I think there need to be at least 2. Would certainly hope that folks would do more than that. Seeker, State Environmental Quality Review, and the Agricultural Review. That's pretty standard for these types of documents. And then finally, you want to establish terms of periodic review. I have alluded to this several times. You don't want to pass a clean energy plan or a component to your plan or a comprehensive plan and just let that sit there and say we're done. As we all know, the world changes. So what you want to do is build in language that mandates that the plan must be revisited within certain intervals. Typically where we'd like to see that, I think, is less than 10 years, but folks do that differently throughout the state. The important thing is to have it there so we don't just set it and forget it. It's really important to assess where we were, how far we've come, and how the goals have been accomplished and what has changed. Finally, you want to publicize, disseminate, and implement the plan. So those are all of the 8 steps. This is kind of another natural break. If folks do have questions now, it would be a good time to do it.
Well, since you decided that there was a question, I suggested we wait till the end, but if you want to take it now. Someone is basically saying some parts of Rockland County, particularly in the town of Ramapo, have extremely dense populations and open space is a premium and there's high levels of growth. How do we sell a BSS system?
So storage is better for that. So what I have found in years of doing this is that people tend to unnecessarily and kind of inaccurately conflate solar and storage. And I understand that I understand why that happens. It is a natural thing to do. But one key difference is that solar requires a lot of space to generate, a moderate amount of electricity. Energy storage, particularly lithium ion, can store very large amounts of energy in a little space. That's part of why lithium ion technology is, coming out ahead, is because of its ability to store a lot of space, a lot of energy without using that much space. So for dense populations, the energy storage doesn't necessarily need open space. Energy storage is much more conducive to, say, a parking lot or something like that. If it weren't so close to the beginning, I would go back. But there's actually a lot of energy storage in New York City, which is funny because New York City has a reputation for not permitting energy storage. They don't permit residential energy storage. They will, however, permit the big 5 megawatt projects. They're not that big. But, so the fire department, FDNY, is fine with larger systems that are outdoors. What they've had an issue with up to the new fire code that is about to go into effect next week is the smaller indoor ones. So space is less of an issue with energy storage. Solar, yeah, if your open space is at a premium, you might want to consider balancing your precious open space with solar development in your comprehensive plan. I just think it's overall probably less of a concern for energy storage. Do we have anyone else at the moment?
Not at the moment, no.
All right, I'm gonna keep going then. So this is the last kind of major section before I just take you through some resources and we do the full Q&A. It's really how you create the clean energy content. So this would all fall under step 6 of the process that I was just describing when you're kind of creating that plan, the clean energy plan. So we've got goals and objectives are going to come first. They should reflect the information gathered from existing conditioning studies and public engagement. Goals could be longer term, broadly focused, and then objectives lay out intentions which support goals. They're more specifically focused. So what we're going to do in this section is it makes sense to think of this as a hierarchy. Goals are the most broad. Objectives are one more level of specificity. And as I introduce new terms, which I will, what they all have in common is they're all going to be drilling down one level of specificity. That's how we're gonna go for this section. And it's really helpful to keep that in mind to be able to understand what we're going through. So our broad goal here is to support the transition toward clean energy sources. Doesn't get much more broad than that. So then we've got our objectives. So a little bit more focus, right? How do we plan to do that? We're going to allow incentivize individuals and businesses to use renewable energy, electric generation facilities, and undertake energy efficiency initiatives, right? So we're going to allow and incentivize. That's going to support our transition toward clean energy. Objective 2, support the expansion of clean energy opportunities through the town's land use policies, plans, and regulation, right? So we're going to have zoning that supports the transition toward clean energy sources. That's objective 2. Objective 3, streamline the project review and approval processes so that it's efficient and predictable. So our third method of supporting the transition toward clean energy sources is going to be to have clear and transparent permitting guidelines for renewable energy projects. Pretty simple stuff. More goals and objectives here. There are going to be a lot of goals and objectives on the coming slides. I'm going to go through less and less of them as we go on. But here's another goal, a common one in New York: balanced clean energy development and continued agricultural operations. So the objective there is to allow clean energy projects in priority agricultural areas only if mitigation for agricultural impacts have been identified and addressed. So mitigation could be a fund, it could be, planting pollinators elsewhere. However you define mitigation would largely be up to you, as long as you're within Department of Ag and Markets regulations. Objective 2 is to encourage solar and other renewable energy production that is compatible with agricultural related business. So that's what we have pictured here. We want solar that's compatible with grazing, or agrivoltaics, if folks haven't heard that term. It is portmanteau of agriculture and photovoltaics. So it's really growing crops on a solar farm. The way that that's achieved is typically to raise the solar panels up on poles so that the light is getting underneath them and also hitting them. So that's one way that you could do objective 2 specifically. Objective 3 is to prioritize balanced siting of clean energy projects on priority farmland identified for protection. It's going back to what I said before. What is our priority farmland? Do we want prime soil? Do we want farmland of statewide importance? Mineral soil groups 1 through 4. Those are the common ones. It would be up to the community which ones you want to protect. So these are additional kind of broad goals to consider. Achieving financial, socioeconomic, and other benefits associated with economic development. So we've got our economic development goal. We've got our environmental goal, our climate change goal here, preventing, mitigating, and or adapting to impacts of climate change. And then we've got our, we'll call it the good student goal here. We want to align with the goals of the state and their policies, and we want to get money from the programs, and we want to get funded to improve our communities in this way. Strategies then are one more level of specificity down from objectives. The strategies are going to offer specific policies and actions which support selected goals and objectives. They should reflect resources, programs, and assistance available to municipalities. So the goal again is very broad. The objective is, what are we going to do to achieve that goal? And then strategy is specifically, what are we going to, what are we actually going to do? So how do we allow and incentivize individuals and businesses to use renewable energy, electric generation facilities, and undertake energy efficiency initiatives? The way that we do that is to offer the RPTL Section 487 tax exemption for clean energy systems, and we're going to actively pursue community choice aggregation. That's how we're incentivizing individuals and businesses to use renewable energy. How are we going to support the expansion of clean energy opportunities through the town's land use policies, plans, and regulations? We're going to do that by amending local zoning to reflect a balanced approach to clean energy. We're going to utilize and modify NYSERDA's model clean energy laws. There's a model storage law and a model solar law. And we're going to adopt the NY Energy Stretch Code. Those are the specifics of how we're going to support the expansion of clean energy opportunities. How are we going to streamline the project review and approval processes so that it's efficient and predictable? We're going to utilize clean energy specific permits and inspection processes, and we're going to, digitize permit applications and fee payments. So we're going to adopt the New York solar permit, and we're going to allow you to do photo applications. That's how we're going to streamline our project review. So I hope that's clear. We've got goals are the most broad. That's the overarching, what are we trying to achieve? Objectives, we're getting a little bit more into it. And then a strategy is the really nitty gritty specific, what tangible steps am I taking to achieve the objective in support of the goal? Few more examples here, and then a lot of examples on the next, I believe it's the next slide, the next 2 slides. I'm not gonna go through all of these. I'm going to pick one that I like. Let's do the second one. Encourage solar and other renewable energy production that is compatible with agricultural or related businesses. So we're going to amend our local zoning requirements to encourage co-location of renewables and agriculture activities or land uses. So that's agrivoltaics. So one way that we can amend local zoning requirements to encourage that is if we have a height restriction that's set at 15 feet. Remember how I said in agrivoltaics, the way to get the light down to the plants and on the panels at the same time is typically to raise the panels so the light can get through. One way that we can encourage that is to raise our height limitation requirement so that we can build those panels a little bigger and let the light get down. Implementation plan. Again, with the specificity rubric here that we've got, it's really, this is the utmost specificity. This is as far as we're going to drill down. Our implementation plan should designate responsibilities, identify available resources, and clarify timelines for selected goals, objectives, and strategies. They can be used to evaluate feasibility of selected objectives and strategies. They can serve as a roadmap to ensure the comp plan components are completed and not forgotten. So this is really, the what, the how, the who. This is everything, the when. So we've got our first goal again, support the transition toward clean energy resources, broad as can be. One more level of specificity here with the objective. How are we going to do that? We're going to streamline the project review and approval process so that it is efficient and predictable. One more level of specificity with strategy. How are we going to do that? We're going to adopt the unified solar permit so that we have clear, transparent, and universal permitting for systems under 25 kilowatts. Who is going to adopt that? Well, the town board is going to work with the building inspector to make the necessary local modifications to the unified permit, and then the town board is going to pass that. What resources are we going to use to do that? We're going to use the Unified Solar Permit Toolkit from NYSERDA, and we're going to reach out to the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Program and the Clean Energy Siting Team if we have any questions about what we should do to the Unified Permit to meet our goals. And then finally, when do we want to have this done? How many months do we anticipate it will take us to pass the Unified Solar Permit? Here's lots of examples. This is our last slide. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. I just want to hit again that we're really just like drilling down and drilling down. So we take an idea with the goal, and by the time we get to the right column, the time period, we really have a pretty solid idea of what we're going to do to achieve that goal and who's going to do it and how long it's going to take. So let's go through the middle one. Our goal is to support financial strategies that further clean energy development and decrease the cost of electricity. Decent goal. The way that we're going to do that is to support residential and commercial clean energy projects through regulations and taxation policies. Okay, so what regulations and taxation policies? We're going to ensure that the RPTL 487 tax exemption remains in place. So we're going to make sure that we keep all of the added value from these systems exempt from additional property taxes. Who is going to do that? Municipal legislature and is going to work with the municipal assessor to make sure that we're leaving that exemption in and honoring it. How are we going to do that? We're going to look at, NYSERDA Solar Guidebook for Local Governments for help, as well as Department of Taxation and Finance. When are we going to do that? And I like to use this one because the when for this is kind of forever, right? If we're going to ensure the RPTL 487 tax exemption remains in place, if we're going to ensure that the current state continues to be the state, we don't necessarily need a time period for that. That's not time limited. We just want to, our goal is to just preserve this policy. I'm not going to go through the others at this point. I find it, I can't see all of you. I can't tell if this is tedious. So I think we can go into the resources here in the question and answer. Comprehensive planning resources. I'll send these slides to Adam. So these are all hyperlinked. If you don't want to wait until you get the slides, all of these resources are available and linked in that comprehensive planning guidebook for local governments that I mentioned at the top. So if you go to clean energy or nyserda.ny.gov/siting, you'll be able to connect to most of these resources. Funding and technical assistance through Ag and Markets, the Department of State. These are links to some funding options for comprehensive planning as promised. Again, there are more links to funding opportunities in the Comprehensive Plan Guidebook that NYSERDA released in December of last year. And if you have questions, need one-on-one technical assistance, it is free. Please don't hesitate to reach out to cleanenergyhelp@nyserda.ny.gov or solarhelp@nyserda.ny.gov. They go to the same place. We're very happy to help you, whether it's one-on-one I'm reviewing a draft law tomorrow and providing comments to a municipality in Westchester. So really happy to help, really happy to look at anything you need, talk through anything. And if, you know, the folks on the clean energy siting team aren't the ones to do it, we can usually get you in the right place. So please don't be shy and don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I think we can take some questions.
Okay. All right. Someone asks, besides siting and fields, what about commercial/industrial rooftops and parking lots? And in parking for parks, alienation of parkland seems to come up even for asphalt lots.
Yeah. So it's absolutely one of the things that you can address in your comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a very appropriate place to do that. You know, so we've identified, you know, that we want to prioritize development on commercial industrial rooftops and parking lots. The reason we want to do that is to preserve our green space. You know, that's a perfectly appropriate part of your comprehensive plan or component of your comprehensive plan for clean energy. Once that's identified there, when the comprehensive plan passes, you can then create zoning regulations to really, you know, give that some teeth and you know, your zoning is how you're actually going to accomplish that. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, but that is, the comprehensive plan is certainly an appropriate avenue to prioritize development on those types of structures. You know, you probably don't want to approach an outright ban on any sort of greenfield. Outright bans are, you know, typically ill-advised, but there are certainly, you know, there's a huge spectrum between incentivizing development in industrial areas and, you know, banning industrial development on greenfields.
And just the issue, I think, of using rooftops. I mean, let's, you know, we'll take that as kind of a little case study in the comprehensive plan. I mean, that would fit into some of the overall broader goals that you talked about. You could then drill down and create specific rules for it, like, you know, the adding of rooftop solar may not constitute a new site plan or something like that. There are ways of incentivizing, you know, through your comprehensive plan and then subsequently with your zoning, how to incentivize these decentralized solar panels.
Right, and that would be, yeah, from that perspective, like what we're going to do, our strategy is going to be to streamline permitting process on rooftops. So that's what's appropriate for the plan, and then that will then give you grounding to say, you know, we're not going to have a site plan review for rooftop, which you probably shouldn't anyway. But just using that example, I think that would be the way to say it.
And the second part of the question talks about you know, in parking for parks, alienation of parkland seems to come up even for asphalt lots. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on parkland alienation. I don't know if that, you know, the adding of solar panels to a parking lot, even in a public park, would necessarily require the alienation. I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
No, just that from my experience, which, you know, is by no means comprehensive of what has happened, but you know, I'm not so sure that developers are typically going to be targeting parks in the first place, just because then they have to deal with New York State parks. If it's a state park, there's just typically extra layers of regulation that they have to deal with, which adds cost to projects. And solar in particular is already a pretty thin margin business for the most part. A lot of these projects can't withstand too much extra stress.
We have another person asking if slides will be available. If you're okay with that, they could just shoot me an email and I can send out, you know, the slideshow if you're all right distributing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you a PDF probably tomorrow to distribute to whoever you'd like.
You brought up real property tax law 487, which is a little bit outside my area, but from what I know about it, it basically it creates an exemption for renewable energy improvements from property taxes. And it basically, when it signed into law, it went into effect everywhere, but communities have the option to opt out of it. I'm just wondering, could you just go into a bit more detail with that? And also, I mean, I imagine NYSERDA has a particular position about not opting out of this rule 487. I don't know if you can be objective. Can you give the devil's advocate reason as to why communities might want to opt out? And then you can then argue the NYSERDA side of why it would be a bad idea to opt out.
I think that the primary reason that folks opt out is because they don't understand the law. So what RPTL 487 does is it offers an exemption from the value added by a renewable energy project to the property. So that's going to be, it's not an abatement. We're not exempting the property from property taxes because there's a solar. It just means the value added by the solar is exempt from taxes. So that's largely uncontroversial for rooftop solar, right? Most people, most communities in New York are fine with rooftop solar not being taxed. Even ground mounted solar, if we're using that solar on site. Like if I have a farm, I have a ground mounted solar, I'm using it to power my farm operation. I haven't come across too many people, and I've been doing this since 2015, specifically on the RPTL 487 issue. I haven't come across too many people who have an issue with that. Where the taxes come into play is community solar. So that's when we're siting the solar in the field and then we're selling the electricity. So it's no longer connected. It's no longer an accessory use. It's no longer connected inherently to what's happening on that site. It becomes the principal use of the property. And since that energy is being sold to utility customers, it also becomes a business. So that's where the tax, the kind of the will to tax solar comes in. RPTL 487 anticipates this. It gives municipalities who remain opted into the exemption the right to require a payment in lieu of taxes or pilot. So you can require that on systems that you want to tax, on more commercial systems, without taxing your residential systems or your systems that are powering a farm operation or otherwise being used on site. If you opt out of 487, you can't opt out conditionally. So if you pass a resolution opting out of RPTL 487, you then by law have to tax the residential, you have to tax the farmland, and you have to tax the commercial operations. All of those projects are getting taxed at their fully assessed value. So what that's going to do, if any project can withstand that, it's going to be the bigger ones. Because it's economies of scale, they're much more able to kind of take that hit. A residential rooftop solar installation is probably not, if you add property taxes to it, the value proposition changes in such a way that folks probably aren't going to pursue it. So really, if you opt out, you're going to have the opposite of the intended effect, where you're really trying to tax these bigger systems. What you're doing is getting rid of the smaller systems and then taxing the bigger systems pretty much as you would anyway. So the way to do it is to leave the exemption in place and then work out pilot payments, payment in lieu of taxes, with developers for the community solar projects and certainly for the large scale renewable utility scale projects. This has been happening in New York long enough. Developers are used to this, they expect it. But if you opt out of that exemption, you're also sending a message to the industry that's, that says, don't look here, don't build here. Because part of standard due diligence for industry, Department of Tax and Finance maintains a list of communities or authorities that have opted out, as does NYSERDA. So part of good due diligence for a developer is to look at that. And if your community is on that list, you're not going to be a good, they're probably going to try to look elsewhere. And you can sidestep all of those negative consequences, taxing your residential, having developers bypass your community by just maintaining the exemption and requiring pilots for the projects that you specifically want to tax. It's a much more kind of sophisticated tool to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So, I mean, back to the initial question, I think for the most part, when folks are opting out, it's because they don't quite understand all of the ramifications of that. And I think the NYSERDA position is just, we want you to do what makes the most sense. And I think, this makes the most sense to go the pilot route instead of, killing your residential market, essentially.
We have a question here. If a town's code is silent with respect to a particular type of renewable, does a property owner have the right to install it without municipal approval? For example, a town has no regulation for wind turbines or battery storage, so a perhaps property owner just installs them with no approval.
That's a good question with a somewhat complex answer. So if there are no zoning laws, just zoning, land use regulations, that's only one piece of the puzzle. There's only one piece of the suite of regulations that developers have to abide by when they're building projects. So if you don't have a zoning code, the fire code, the building code, the existing all the uniform codes, the National Electric Code, the energy code, all of those codes still apply because they're state law. All of those codes are going to have regulations for electrical equipment. So I see that one of the examples is battery storage. If you don't have a battery storage zoning law, that mostly just means those projects have to abide by the fire code and the uniform code and the NEC. That's what's regulating them. It's not that you can just develop it and not have anybody look at it, not have anybody approve it. The municipality is still involved. It's just your code enforcement folks instead of your zoning and planning folks.
Well, I mean, that's you talk about there's no zoning code. I mean, that there may be, if this community has a zoning code, but it doesn't say anything specific about renewables.
Sure, if you have a zoning code, and so let's use energy storage again, and we have setbacks for accessory structures in this zone, then the energy storage, as long as it's tied to the energy usage on site, that would make it an accessory structure. It then has to follow the setback requirements that apply to accessory structures. And actually in NYSERDA zoning guidance, a lot of those issues, we actually advise municipalities to defer to their underlying zoning and not, only create special regulations for these technologies where these technologies really warrant special regulations. But in most ways, particularly from a safety perspective, the important regulations are the uniform code. The land use is, secondary, particularly for energy storage, a little less so for solar. So yeah, it's just the underlying. If you have zoning but don't have zoning for storage or solar, then you just default to the underlying zoning requirements for any other type of development.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of interpret that as just being, whenever not every use is explicitly listed in your zoning codes, and this is that's not specific to renewable energies. I mean, it happens with all sorts of different uses. I mean, of all the things that people do in their homes, that would be just, they're maybe not explicitly stated as an accessory use, but people just do it as an accessory use. So I think this would just fall under, you know, the general interpretations of what your zoning regulations say and what's allowed. You know, whoever your zoning authority is in your municipality would make a determination. There's also, and that's what you talk about accessory uses and accessory structures. Yes, I mean, if you have an accessory structure setback limit or accessory structure height limit, someone wanted to build a wind turbine, they would have to keep to that height limit. That's, you know, if it said nothing about it. If, again, if it was considered an accessory structure, you know, and just in terms of principal structures, if it's not an approved use, most municipalities have, you know, they are permissive zoning ordinances, and permissive is kind of, you know, it's actually more restrictive than prohibitive zoning setups, in that approved uses are listed explicitly. If someone wanted to, as a principal use, create some kind, you know, a field of solar voltaics, and that's not an allowed use, I would say it's not allowed, even if it's not explicitly stated. All right. There's another question, unless you have something else to add about that last one. No? Okay. There is a movement in New York State to have all new construction be all electric by 2024. Can this override any local comp plan or zoning?
I mean, I don't think that they would. Your zoning wouldn't. Zoning typically is going to focus on what's outside. Yeah. Zoning isn't going to touch the inside of your building. So zoning, in terms of whether or not your heat is electric, zoning would never affect that for the most part.
You mentioned the New York State or New York Stretch Energy Code. Could you just give a little more detail about that? Because I've heard it, but I'm not too familiar with it myself.
I'm not familiar enough to speak to it right now. I can send some information from our Clean Energy Communities program along with these slides to distribute with folks. But just because we do have a program within NYSERDA that does really kind of focus on that, I don't want to have my NYSERDA hat on and say something that's not wholly accurate. Or
sounds good. Double checking, I'm in Orange County. What is email for receiving credit for this webinar? I will put my email in the chat right now. If you just give me 1 second. All right, I just put my email in the chat. So anyone from outside of Rockland who needs to get a certificate of attendance, just shoot me an email and I will get that out to you. Okay. Just a thought, and I'm not sure, you know, that you have about what you might say about this bill, but you know, municipalities do comp plans and they do update them periodically, but you know, like you said, 10 years can go by before they happen. I just don't want anyone out there to get the impression that you have to wait until your comp plan is due for a redo before you can get started on any of this. Chances are even a 10-year-old comp plan will probably have some language in it about promoting, you know, green and technology or something. It might not be as specific as you'd like, or as the examples you gave, but you know, for all the people out there, don't think that you have to wait until you know, you're redoing your comp plan, especially if you've just done it recently or something like that, before you could, you know, get started on any of these policies. Anything? Any thoughts on that?
yeah, I think that's exactly right. You don't need to wait. In fact, I would actually, if your comp plan is in, in the 10-ish year range, if your comp plan is older than 2016, I would say definitely relook at, review it with a clean energy lens as soon as possible. If you've done it since 2016, so we started to see community solar, the large scale renewables program, less has changed since then. But pre 2016 and after 2016, from particularly a solar perspective, is really a different world in New York. So if it's older than that, I would say you're definitely due to look at it through a clean energy lens.
All right. Well, at the moment, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A. So if you want to give anybody another minute, just to, if they think of anything.
Sure.
All right. Well, no, I'm not seeing anything. All right. Well, if you're all, if you'd like, I could start, just wrap it up if you're okay with that, Bill.
Sure.
All right. Well, just want to say thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. You gave us a lot of information for us to digest. And, like I said, people have any questions or want any of the documentations or slides, just let me know and I'll get that out to you. And I just want to thank all of you out there for joining us tonight. I was reminded by one of our presenters at a session last week, the planning and zoning board members are volunteers and you are doing a job that is mostly thankless. So for tonight, thank you. Thank you for the time and effort you give to your community. I hope everyone here enjoyed this session. Like I said, if you are outside of Rockland, shoot me an email and I'll get that certificate out to you. And before we go, I just want to remind everyone that on Wednesday next week, the 13th, we have a training session on affordable housing with Department of State. And then on Tuesday, April 26th, we are back with NYSERDA. We're going to be going over the overview of the model solar law. And keep an eye out for any other emails for training sessions offered by the Federation or other groups that we offer credit for. So Bill, thank you very much. It was good to meet you. I appreciate your time. And someone got a question in. Will sufficient renewables be available in time to handle the shutdown of nuclear?
It doesn't have to be renewables, but really so from the NYSERDA's perspective, the New York State Independent System Operator, grid reliability is really priority number one. It will not be sacrificed for any goals, state or otherwise. So the reliability of the grid is going to come first. So there would not be a situation whereby we continue to decommission nuclear and rely on an unreliable source to take its place.
Okay. I was listening in on a meeting about Indian Point decommissioning, and the point that people made at that particular session was that the improvements in energy efficiency across the state made up for the loss of power from Indian Point. So that's something to consider too. Hopefully, as we get to a more energy efficient future, we will need less reliant. The needs on the grid will not be quite the same as well. So something I can throw in a little factoid there.
Absolutely, and it's certainly an all of the above approach. It's not solar's not going to fix it alone. Wind's not going to, offshore is not going to fix it alone. It's everything, and that very much includes energy efficiency, especially if with increasing electrification and loads increasing, efficiency is going to be probably the main driver of the future here. So,
all right, well, I think that's a great place to end then. I think that's a good statement. So again, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening and keep an eye out for the next sessions, and I hope you can join us then. All right. Thank you very much, Bill. Good night, everyone. I think you have to be the one to end it since I made you host. Oh, there we go.
You did have a couple of thank yous in the chat.
Thank you. I saw a couple pop up, but
Yeah.
I appreciate the thank yous to everyone out there. Oh,
Yeah.
it looks like someone was asking, are we sure about that fact?
Which fact?
I believe probably the one about the increase in efficiency making up for the loss of Indian Point.
Mm.
This was a webinar I attended a few months ago. I can't remember the exact source, but I do remember that that being stated. So I guess I can't really back that up off the top of my head with a citation, but it sounds good, doesn't it? All right. Well, since our featured guest is gone, I'm going to end the session. So good night, everyone. Night, Helen.
Good night, Adam. You know I'm out tomorrow, right?
I do now. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good day off.
I'm reachable if you need me.
All right.
All right. Good
Bye.
job. Talk to you, if not tomorrow, Monday.
All right.
Bye. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.